Now on to Paul Turner.
Hello, good evening everyone. So a couple of weeks ago I presented at the IGS Teach Meet, and the topic I was talking about there was about teaching the Anthropocene. So the idea that we live in the age of humans, and that has to, the severity and the importance of that, or the significance of it, means it needs to have a knock-on impact in our classrooms. So I thought today I would talk about how I teach the planetary emergency. And so what I've got is trying to take these sort of more abstract ideas of how I think we need to change the way that we teach, or how we think we need to change the way that we teach, actually give you some sort of specific examples. So I've got 4 ideas. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. This here was the cover slide of the presentation I gave before, and what those 3 sentences summarize what I'm trying to get across. This idea that the science is clear, we face an unprecedented global emergency, and we must teach for the Anthropocene. So the scale and significance of this means it has a knock-on impact in the way that we teach, or it should do. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a couple of websites now as well, just to highlight some of this. So to begin with here, this first one, this might have passed you by, but back in November of 2019, a group of 11,000 scientists published a letter to the International Journal of Bioscience that was also copied into lots of big newspapers internationally. And the headline of this says, "World Scientists Warning of a Climate Emergency." And there is just the first paragraph that I was keen to read to you. It says, "Scientists have a moral obligation to clearly warn humanity of any catastrophic threat and to tell it like it is. On the basis of this obligation and the graphical indicators presented below, we declare, with more than 11,000 scientists' signatories from around the world, clearly and unequivocally that planet Earth is facing a climate emergency." So these are not extreme people on the fringes of society. These are your everyday scientists. And I also think that we could quite easily change that scientists to teachers. And there is a moral obligation with teachers in terms of preparing students for the future and equipping them with skills and knowledge and all those sorts of things. And so, you know, some of this should be ringing true in terms of our thinking. So, I mean, I'll show you these. These are things, again, that are really, people see very frequently. We all know as geography teachers, carbon dioxide, methane, all of these sorts of things that are increasing. And this is the illustration of the kind of impacts of this climate emergency. And so just to reiterate that point, there was only a month ago, there was this article that was released in The Guardian that said, "World leaders pledge to halt Earth's destruction ahead of UN summit." And it had leaders of some of the wealthiest countries in the world, 60 countries promising. And let me just read again. It says here so these leaders from 5 continents warn that humanity is in a state of planetary emergency due to the climate crisis and the rampant destruction of life-sustaining ecosystems. Now, again, these are words of world leaders. These are not crazy people on the fringes of society. And what I am kind of posing is that language you use in the classroom? And should it not be that we are? And that's something I'm going to question in a second. So here are my 4 ideas, or the 4 key concepts within this, kind of how I teach the planetary emergency. So the first one is thinking, actually, this is not something that we should isolate within its own topic, and that you tick a box and say, I've done that topic. We did that back in, I don't know, year 7. It's something that needs to be in every topic and also almost every lesson. So what I thought I would do is Jog.3, a textbook that maybe forms the foundation of a lot of people's Key Stage 3. We're looking at the contents and the ideas it has within it. You can see something like teaching from rock to soil. There's lots of opportunity within that to look at the fast and slow, or the different types of carbon cycle. which you can then link to this planetary emergency. You've got things like living off Earth's resources. Again, there's so much opportunity to emphasize the planetary emergency. So every topic. The next one then is language. So what I would like to propose is that words like probable and possible and future, we kind of wrap up and throw away, because we need to be talking about this as the impacts now. So to remove that sense of, oh, it's something in the future, it genuinely is something that we're seeing the impacts of now. And again, let me just show you one other. Sorry, let me just find. Here it is. Okay. Another news article that was saying our planet is in crisis, but until we call it a crisis, no one will listen. And so the way that we communicate it and the language that we use is really fundamental. And this article talks about Senator Kamala Harris, who was asked about climate change in a Democratic debate in June. And she said, look, I'm not going to mince my words. I don't even call it climate change. I call it the climate crisis. And similarly, there are lots of other phrases. So increasingly now, scientists are not calling it global warming, but we call it global heating, talking about things like the climate crisis and the ecological emergency, or the climate emergency. Again, the BBC and The Guardian have released sort of reports to say, this is how we're going to change our language and how all of our journalists should be kind of phrasing this. So it's important that we use the most appropriate language. And I think if we rely on things like textbooks or exam syllabuses, you know, we're out of date in a sense that the language of this has evolved, and that's all linked to this idea of how we respond to it. Okay, the next one then is thinking about images and the imagery we use, because obviously the imagery is really powerful. Now, my presumption and from experience, I think that a lot of teachers use very abstract images of flooded landscapes or forests on fire. And what I'm going to sort of suggest is actually we should be using far more faces, and we need to give a personal face, a kind of a personal context to this. So someone I wanted to suggest that I've used in the past is an artist called Gideon Mendel, who has a really long series of photography projects. And one of them is called the Submerged Portraits. And he has gone around the world and visited communities that have experienced flooding. And he's taken them in a way that really emphasizes the humanity and the personal aspect of this. And so I think they're really strong images that you could use. And actually, what's really interesting is they're completely sort of varied places around the world. So you've got very traditional places that you might think of as flooded, but then you've also got other sort of European countries. Also, we've got places, you know, in South America and in Southeast Asia as well. So faces and giving it a personal kind of aspect. And then the last thing that I wanted to emphasize as well was that often the examples we use, and I think this is true in terms of what Rachel was saying as well, we can use examples that sort of appeal in the sense that they're quite extreme. And yes, there are certain places around the world where, you know, like the Arctic, you know, that lends itself in terms of looking at impacts from climate change. But the only way that this really comes home and sort of people feel some sort of visceral response to is if we emphasize the impacts now on communities and where we live. And so, you know, what you need to do as teachers is to then incorporate ways that climate change is impacting your students now, be it on maybe the availability of food or food prices or flooding. You know, if you're in a school in Somerset, you know, you are within your rights to link that flood event with climate change. And there is plenty of evidence from the Met Office that links these sort of one-off weather events with longer-term climate change and talks about how that impacts the intensity and severity of those sorts of events. So I just wanted to reiterate then at the end, my 4 points: every topic, language, images, and examples. So thank you.